Welcome to a new edition of the Gerety Talks. I'm Lucy Ongay, the co-founder of Gerety, the award that brings together a jury to select advertising from a powerful perspective. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for our weekly episodes where we chat with some of the marketing and creative industries through changemakers. I'm very happy today to welcome our guests who are all part of Edelman around the world. We have Margaux Gutmann, art director at Edelman in France. Bonjour, Margaux.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here.
We have Mary Soroka, Global Vice President, Creative Director at Edelman in New York. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Elizabeth Mulligan, Vice President, Nutrition at Edelman in San Diego, California.
Thank you.
Welcome too. Thank you so much for joining us today. So let's start by introducing yourselves and tell us a little bit more about your roles and Edelman. Margaux, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an art director at Edelman. So I've been there for a year and a half. So my role is to create concepts for clients and make them come to life in the best way possible. And for that, I'm working with a lot of incredibly talented people, such as directors, photographers, motion designers, and so on. And I'm also responsible for all the young creative assistants that are coming into the office. So it's like doing my best to teach them all my tricks and how to become like a great art director.
Great. Mary, would you like to go on?
Yeah, so I'm a vice president and creative director. I'm based in New York, but I sit on the global creative team, which means that I work on briefs from all around the world. So in those cases, I either oversee a creative campaign, oversee the creative team creating it, or function as the creative myself on it. And I have a few art directors that report directly to me.
Elizabeth?
Hi, yes. So I'm Elizabeth Mulligan. I'm a vice president based out of the Chicago office, but as mentioned, I live in San Diego, California. My background is actually as a registered dietitian and nutritionist, so I have kind of a strange foray into this world. But my role within Edelman is to help take complex scientific information and craft that into artful and understandable creative campaigns that can be easily understood and meaningfully interesting for the average everyday consumer.
Great. And what are the biggest challenges you're facing today in your role?
I'm happy to go first.
Yes.
So sitting in the food and beverage side of Edelman, one thing that we're constantly running into is that food and beverage manufacturers are oftentimes light years ahead of governmental regulations. In the US, we really only change our regulations about twice a decade, where the food and beverage manufacturers are innovating much, much quicker than that. And so our role is to really work with our stakeholders and policymakers and consumers in a way that can communicate their products and really show off their nutritional integrity in a way that still works within some of our constraints from a regulation standpoint.
Mary?
I think a challenge that is really ongoing that we face in creative PR is it's sort of a challenge and a responsibility to be able to identify a very authentic and purposeful role for a company who might have a real reason or be in a genuine position to enter a cultural conversation based on their existing relationship to the world, to their audience, and then help them earn the public's permission and an ongoing consent to participate and then be able to communicate about a cause or a topic on behalf of a brand in a way that isn't self-serving or intrusive and, certainly not allowing any of our creative acrobatics and spectacles or any benefits to the brand take away from the cause itself.
And do you think with that after the pandemic, everybody started talking more about purpose? Do you think that gets tricky with purpose involved?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's something that you have to pay to play. Like brands have to invest in authentic ways. I think, people call BS really quickly now. We really democratize like responses to advertising through the internet and social media. And so I think it's more difficult, it's more challenging, but it's also so much more rewarding for a brand, especially in the last couple of years, to put their money where their mouth is and go out on a limb and stand up for something.
I do agree. I was about to say quite the same thing, that my biggest challenge is like to convince brands and clients to do the right thing, and for that it means that they need to change things also within their companies sometime. Yes. And I must admit that the French market, because I'm working on the European market, the French market might be like maybe the most traditional one. So sometimes it's very complicated to show them that a certain tone or a sense of humor can really help them take on a topic for our society.
And you also told that you were teaching new generations. Do you find like challenges? Everybody says that the new generation are working in a different way and they don't want to stay very late in the agency and these kind of things. Are you challenged by this kind of attitudes or things ways they think?
Not particularly, because I'm also part of that young generation. So and I also had very different profiles. There were those who really wanted to work super late, and I had to fight them again not doing this, and those who were like really respectful of the hours. I guess maybe the thing that I can see that is the most striking is that they are very, very shy, shy to speak in front of the public, and even shy to talk about what they really believe in and what they think is the best option, specifically when we talk about art direction. I don't know if you have the same point of view, because you have also other creatives to manage.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's like not a one size fits all approach to every creative, right? Like there are very introverted creatives who like to just sit down and craft, and then there are people who like really shine when they're in front of the client and they're presenting. So you really have to, especially as a manager, you have to learn how to diversify your approach and how you make everyone feel comfortable so you can bring out the best in them.
Yeah, and if I could add, I think there's a lot to learn from this younger generation too. Coming up in my career right after the Great Recession was very much a hustler's world, whereas now I think we're beginning to right set what balance looks like in a career, thanks to the younger generation. And I just think there's a lot to learn as leaders in not overexerting yourself and learning when to take breaks, because candidly, they're much better at it than I think a lot of people in their 30s and 40s are.
And do you think that changed in a way for good or for bad with the pandemic? Because all this of working from home and life-work balance, I'm not sure if it was better now or worse.
I think it's very individualistic. There are certainly people who have excelled in the work from home life. I do think that with people who are very fresh in their careers, starting their careers just working from home and working remotely, it was probably very challenging. And I think they missed a lot of those educational experiences that others had being in the office and just hearing other conversations that were being had around them. But I think we're beginning to get into a place where we're catching up for that lost time.
So let's talk about some of the campaigns you have been involved in. Mary, you were part of hashtag Let Her Grow for Dove Thailand. So tell us a little bit how you came up with the idea and how it worked.
Sure. So myself and my creative partner on the project, she's in Canada, her name is Shauna Rowe, we worked very closely with a small team in Thailand to create that campaign, along with a couple of other global team members. How we came up with the idea is first we were basically handed an extremely specific and really incredible problem to solve, which was that teachers in Thailand were subjecting students to forced haircuts at school as a form of discipline. But according to a lot of the students, it really felt more like an act of punishment and control, especially for the young girls who were all given this identical, very short bob haircut with blunt bangs that, we were told made them feel infantilized and humiliated and unable to express who they really were. So we were already starting off with something really compelling and real to address in a totally different part of the world, which was a little terrifying, but also, very inspiring and exciting. So we started by first establishing very open and very honest communication with our team in Thailand, and just not being afraid to ask about what we didn't know. We weren't trying to just creatively bulldoze someone else's culture. We wanted to understand the history and the context, things like the military rules from the 70s that, to this day still influence Thai culture, and the aesthetic expected of students, or, the very nuanced feelings that parents and teachers have about discipline and respect there, and where children fit into that. And then we had our brand, Dove, whose cultural mission for so long has been rooted in helping to develop girls' self-esteem. So there was a really natural connection to the human problem. And then it was just a matter of pitching a ton of ideas to our team in Thailand. And in the end, the campaign phrase, "Let her grow," I think was just kind of naturally born out of all of those discussions, and what we wanted to achieve, combined with the brand purpose, with a little bit of hair thrown in there. And then the idea of putting the actual haircut, the bob, on influencers and media figures and turning it into a QR code, all of that just came from the really simple notion that, it's not a haircut for adults. It's a tool. It's an outdated practice. It's a temporary measure that really has no place in the grown-up world. And if that haircut feels jarring and out of place in society on grown adults, why would it be something to force onto children and use it against them, use it to limit them while they are becoming who they are?
That's super interesting. And Margaux, you were part of Cost of Inequality. Please tell us more about this project.
Yes, of course, it's a very dear project to me. Also because we were this really small crew of strategists and creatives that were all feminists. So it was kind of like the dream project we could ever have. I'm sorry, maybe it might not be French, but basically what was super cool is that La Fondation des Femmes, which is the charity that is working for women's rights in France, asked us to create a campaign that would leverage all the presidential candidates to commit to the 10 measures they've created to end gender inequalities in France. And it was very interesting because when we talked about it with our strategist, Elena Moscovich, who's now working in New York, we realized that there's something in society where right now, gender inequalities are not something that people really believe in. They think that it's kind of over, and that women, and feminists included, are just telling stories and asking for things that they shouldn't ask for. So with Lauren Haberfield and Ellen Lucas, we had to find this new way of talking about this problem that could also involve politicians. So we decided that we could speak the way they're talking, use their languages. And in that case, it would be talking about numbers, talking about money. And that's when we thought about, really calculating the cost of inequalities. And so we asked Lucille Pétavin, who already done a study on the cost of toxic masculinity. And so she calculated all that huge cost. And then we just had to turn it into this bill that we would send to the politicians, and we would ask all the citizens in France to send it to their presidential candidates. So that would be this kind of huge movement to say, hey, this is something that not only impacts women, but also impact the whole society. And we really have to do something, because by doing nothing, the whole society is paying for that.
Okay. And do you remember your first impression when you saw the final figure? I'm very curious about that.
We were so afraid the cost would be small and that it wouldn't have any impact. And when we saw the number, we were like, damn, this is like a really huge a really huge number. And in France, like the question of the debt is so important. And now we have also the retiring thing. And so like all this money that we could save could solve a lot of problems. So it's not that we were happy, but we're like, this is a real proof.
Okay, interesting also. And Elizabeth, were involved in #dinner with Goop.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that project.
Yeah, so this campaign was with our client Ajinomoto, which is a food and beverage ingredient manufacturer based out of Tokyo, Japan. And in the US specifically, they're most known for making the ingredient monosodium glutamate, otherwise known as MSG. MSG is a perfectly safe umami seasoning, but in the US, it's been riddled with a lot of misinformation for about a half a century now. And this misinformation that's rooted in anti-Asian xenophobia, in stigma, chemophobia, and a lot of really poorly conducted science has actually led to, for the last half a century, Americans being terrified of a perfectly safe ingredient. So what we have been on the mission for the last 6 years or so is to help overturn that misperception. And specifically with Dinner with Goop, what we uncovered is that while American sentiment is changing around MSG, the biggest hurdle that's really in our way right now is this really popular diet called clean eating. Clean eating diet, nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just not, there's a lot of really like drastic information around it. Oftentimes it's spouting, don't eat anything with a chemical sounding name. For example, monosodium glutamate has a very chemically sounding name. And so oftentimes MSG is kind of painted as the #1 ingredient to avoid if you're following a clean eating diet. So through that research, we uncovered Goop, which is a lifestyle platform founded by Gwyneth Paltrow, as one of the biggest perpetuators of the clean eating diet, specifically sharing a lot of information that's incorrect around MSG. And so what we wanted to do was create a lighthearted campaign that not only showed MSG as perfectly safe, but also kind of played into this pop culture element using Goop by inviting Gwyneth Paltrow herself and the Goop brand to sit down with us at dinner. Just for a friendly conversation around why MSG is safe and how you can use it in your recipes at home. Well, Goop unfortunately didn't respond to the invite. We did ultimately get a lot of social conversation, a lot of great earned media coverage. And I think most importantly, Goop ended up removing a lot of the MSG misinformation from their website, and they added disclaimers to their website for other topics just to show what things are emerging science and shouldn't necessarily be taken as gospel. So it's definitely a step in the right direction and ultimately landed not necessarily the dinner we were expecting, but the right outcome.
You must have this problem about people misunderstanding things or false information about food all the time, right?
Yeah, it's exactly what's gotten me into this world and why I've stayed in communications and marketing really my entire career. There's a lot of misinformation and misunderstandings around food and nutrition. And so having people who have a love for creative storytelling, but that scientific background really helps make the campaigns a bit more powerful depending on the client's needs.
So yeah, let's skip directly with you, Elizabeth, for my next question, which is how did you begin your journey in advertising? So you started more or less answering.
Yeah. So my background, as a dietitian is I always knew I liked creative work. I liked more of the business side of things, but I've always had a passion for health and nutrition specifically. So I went to school to become a registered dietitian and pretty quickly realized I didn't want to work in a traditional place. I wasn't meant to be in a hospital or in a school or in, more of the traditional jobs for dietitians. And I was really fortunate through a lot of support from my family and friends to take a leap. And after working as a dietitian for a little bit, take a few steps back and intern at a public relations agency. And ever since then, I have just loved bringing the science into communications and creative campaigns. And it's a very fun but niche world for a dietitian to be working in.
And what about you, Mary? How did you begin your journey? You always knew you wanted to work in advertising, or was it just by chance?
There were some important influences, I think, really close to me growing up, actually within my family. Growing up, my dad has always been very pragmatic and kind of business minded, and my mom was always very creative. And so I think I kind of internalized these two very polar influences, with having sort of this like grounded, objective problem solving perspective on the one hand, and like complete artistic freedom and self-expression on the other. And I think that kind of perfectly represented to me what creative advertising and PR ended up meaning in my life. Combining strategy and business knowledge with creativity and psychology. So after growing up being pretty creative, I went to university for design and majored in advertising. And when I was in school, I did a couple of internships at different ad agencies while I was still a student. But in my final year at school, I won the program medal in advertising for my thesis project, which got the attention of a couple of people in the industry who were interested in hiring me. But what actually ended up happening was I met someone named Anthony Chalvanathan, who is now the Chief Creative Officer at Edelman Canada. And he referred me at that time for an interview with his boss then, who was Judy John, who is now the Global Chief Creative Officer at Edelman. And these two both were at Leo Burnett at the time, and Judy was running it in Toronto. And I met her and her creative partner, Lisa Greenberg, who I love. And that was it. 2 weeks later, I graduated and I had my first job.
Okay. Margaux?
It was a process, in the sense of when I was smaller, I wanted to be an illustrator. Then in high school, I discovered, oh, damn, there's graphic design. That could be interesting. And when I was studying graphic design, I really wanted to be the creative that came with the, the stupid ideas, like the funny TV ads you can find on TV. I wanted to do the stupid things. And then eventually doing my higher, I could say university, when I was studying communication and advertising, this is when I started to be a bit more into politics and societal issues. And this is when I started to dream of mixing my skills and this, but I wasn't really aware of what was activations or what was the PR word. And I started to work in advertising after my diplomas, actually. And I think it went well, but I think the thing that really changed me or helped me to do me grow up in what I'm now is when I met 3 years ago in BETC Lauren Haberfield, because she became my mentor and she showed me that there was a possibility to do meaningful things in advertising. But yeah, that's quite what happened.
And how do you keep up the pulse on the latest trends? I'm going to do that again. So how do you keep up the pulse on latest trends or the interesting things happening? Where do you nurture your creative thirst? Margaux, you want to start?
People will make fun of me, but on LinkedIn, because
Okay.
really I'm following a lot of really small but really creative agencies that have very bold aesthetics. And it's also where like everyone is like sharing what they're doing currently.
Mm.
And then it's about, of course, looking at a lot of different medias that talk about advertising and keeping up with what Edelman is doing. Because like in terms of like PR and earned content, like I'm looking for this kind of examples to know what I have to do too. And yeah, that's it. Sorry.
Mary, what about you? Where do you feed yourself creatively?
There was a period I went definitely through a phase when I was a junior creative where I was really consuming a lot of other ads, and I actually ended up kind of drifting away from that because I found that it was too influential on me, and it sort of was, I ended up in a place where I felt like I was imitating more than I was inventing. So nowadays I actually don't watch ads. I don't really use social media. I do use LinkedIn, but I don't really consume a lot of content from within the industry. I read a lot about culture. I do watch a lot of films. I love to travel. I try to understand different cultures, but really, I feel like my most useful sources of inspiration have to be from things in life that feel kind of timeless and universal. I think that trends can sometimes just feel like different ways of repackaging the same ideas or experiences with like minor progress or like minor updates every few years. And I think as a creative, it's certainly easy for us to like, it's very easy, intuitive for us to tap into that as we need it. But I think what's harder to do is to really understand what makes people behave the way that they do and the way that they live and make decisions and the way that they change over time. And I usually turn to those questions for inspiration. I find them the most inspiring and, as you say, thirst inducing.
Elizabeth?
I actually take a lot of inspiration from social media. I find that you can tailor your algorithm or whoever you're following to feed you content that can feed that thirst, if you will. So I try to use some of my passive social media scrolling to my advantage, and use that as a place where I can see what's happening in the world and hopefully take some inspiration from it that I can use that in my professional life.
And what kind of campaigns or topics would you like to see rewarded this year at creative festivals?
I think the unifying thing between the three campaigns we have spoken about today is that they're all rooted in purpose and making a change in people's lives, whether it's as seemingly small as allowing a culturally significant ingredient like MSG to be universally beloved in the US, or as large as the two other campaigns we spoke about. So I think these campaigns that really get to human universal truths and can make a change in people's lives, those are the ones I personally would love to see continue to be awarded.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would add maybe that because that would be maybe a first or something interesting. Something about animals' rights could be like interesting. Besides, climate crisis, of course, or like women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, politics and stuff. And that's something that could be surprising and new.
I love that. Love animals. Yeah, those were both perfect answers. I agree. And I think, companies and brands that campaigns where organizations are taking financial and reputational risks, manage risks, but meaningful risks, and ones that demonstrate that when you act with conviction, that's when you make a difference. And I really love campaigns that, sometimes even in their case studies include the backlash to the campaign. And I love when they don't shy away when they're confronted by, all the haters in the world. I want to see those recognized.
And the last question that is a little bit related. So where do you think the industry is heading towards? And where do you wish it was heading towards if it's not the same direction?
I think that, as we've been talking about a lot just on this call, we see brands starting to get squeezed in a very real way when it comes to proving their dedication to a cause. And that's such a great thing. I hope that the more superficial and kind of transient brand activism becomes seen as even more of a transgression for companies, and that all of us and society demand that they show up authentically and invest deeply in the cultures that really are allowing them to thrive in the first place. I think all of us, I think brands, I think the industry as a whole, I think we owe a lot to our audience. Really, I think that we owe them our existence. So I hope that brands learn to say less and do more.
Say less and do more. That's interesting.
Yeah, I completely agree. That was perfectly.
Yeah, I completely agree too. And that's something that is very interesting because I don't know elsewhere in the world, but at least in France, there's this whole debate between creatives of whether or not purposeful campaigns should be rewarded, or if we should stick to traditional advertising and crafted things. But if you listen to what people say and what people ask, they want brands to act concretely. So for sure, being sincere and socially oriented.
Yeah, I think similar to what everyone's already said, I think the industry is moving into a place where not doing the right thing is going to be a bigger risk than not putting your money where your mouth is, and not taking a stand for controversial items that brands have a real reason to be part of.
Great. So let's hope to see many of your projects involving this kind of things. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your thoughts and your time with us, and for telling us about these great campaigns you've been doing. Keep up the good work. Hope you have lots of great projects this year coming over too.
Thank you. Thank you guys.
Thank you.